Welcome to the Central Ideas Podcast. This is Molly Zunvik. Today I'm going to be talking to Dr. Gold, who was here with us for the first episode. If you want to check out her credentials and some information about her, you can go back to the first episode and look. In this discussion, we're going to be delving into some deeper topics, such as setting goals for yourself, time management, and clinical therapy. Welcome, Dr. Gold.
Thank you.
Well, I think we can just jump into it. We don't have much time today. Our first topic will be goals and setting goals in life, how important they are for our orientation in the world, and such. So I was wondering if you could just go ahead and elaborate on that. Why do we have goals in life? Why should we have a goal?
Goals serve a number of purposes for us. One, it does orient us in life. It gives us a direction, and then the motivation for reaching those goals. Motivation is an entirely different topic, but the motivation for reaching those goals then gives us the energy to move. Without goals, what we do is wander. We just drift, and sometimes we set goals that we're not even aware of. So, like hedonistic goals, my goal is to, enjoy myself as very best I can in every moment. And we may not be aware that that's our goal. And if we're not aware that that's our goal, we may end up wasting time and not achieving much except for immediate hedonic satisfaction.
So like short-term goals, then,
Right.
in a sense.
Right.
Yeah. Immediate
Right.
gratification. Yeah. Well, what kind of goals should we have? Should we have long-term goals or short-term goals? Which ones are the most useful ones in your way of viewing it?
Most psychologists look at goal setting as a process where we develop kind of a long-term vision, but we don't have very much control over that long-term goal.
Mm-hmm.
And that long-term goal needs to be pretty vague because, so like something, what do you want from your life in 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Then we can set more intermediate range goals like what would you like to do or get done in the next 5 years? That should be a little bit more specific. So you can look at things like I'd like to finish my education, and these are some things I'd like to do during my education so that I'm prepared for the world of work. We can set short-term goals, which would be like in the next year or so. Those can be pretty specific. Like I need to take these courses, I would like to get a job this summer, earn enough money to be able to do these things. And then we can set these kind of mini goals for what I'm going to do in the next, week to month.
Mm-hmm.
Those can be even more specific, but the goals we have the most control over are our micro goals. What am I going to do with the next 15 minutes? So those are the goals that you have the most control over and that are the most important. If you think about the long-term goal and then work backward, so you plan backward from that long-term goal, you can get to what do I need to be doing today in order to get me to where I want to be in 10 years. And then you can work on those goals. You can at least keep them in mind as being important. That can give you sort of the motivation for achieving the short-term goal, which may not seem particularly relevant, like doing your algebra homework.
Yeah.
Although algebra homework is required to pass the algebra class, which is required to finish the degree, which is required to, and on and on.
Yeah, and I would definitely concur. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere without setting those minimum goals, like I'm going to do my homework, like you mentioned, or I'm going to read this book today because I think I'll gain a lot of wisdom from reading. So I read a lot, for example, because I know it's not that I want to read 5 hours a day. Like that's very stressful. It's very difficult actually, and I want to go around and hang out with people and hang out more with my fiance, and I want to watch my YouTube videos, and there's no shortage of our wants, desires, appetites.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to limit them and set a vision for our lives in order to get somewhere. Because without goals, we can't orient ourselves in the world. And I think that without orientation, we don't have meaning in life because we're just going to float around, like you said in the beginning. You're just in motion, so to speak.
Just drifting.
Without none, you're just drifting. And so, well, So say I'm gonna make a goal for my life. How should I make that goal? Should I set a high ideal and aim directly at the ideal, or should I set up like one that I can manage, like that I know I can manage? Which one should I pick? Do you think? Which one would motivate me more?
I'm going to go into my goal spiel here.
Okay.
And I didn't prepare, so I don't have the reference for where this came from. But there's a doctrine out there for SMART goals, SMART. So your goal needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So the SMART goal, the specific goal, is one that is something that you do. I think it's easier to set goals to do things than it is to set goals to not do things. So, for example, if I wanted to reduce the amount of food I ate, I might set a goal to increase the amount of water I drink during a meal. So I can reinforce myself for increasing my water intake, and that will hopefully then decrease my food intake because I've got limited room in my stomach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like to set specific, doable goals. So something that I can reward myself for doing something, not for not doing something. And I think that's something that people have a lot of difficulty with. They want to quit procrastinating, or they want to quit eating so much, or they want to quit being lazy, or and it's hard to change. It's hard to change those behaviors. It's easier to replace them.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think SMART goals, those specific goals, it's easier if you set them as in positive terms. So I want to increase my water intake during meals. I want to increase the amount I swim per week. I want to increase the amount of homework I do in a week, rather than I want to stop procrastinating. I want to stop being a couch potato.
Mm-hmm.
So being very specific about what you are actually going to do, what the behavior is going to be, I think is really helpful. Then making sure that that behavior is measurable. So we've got a specific goal. Now let's make it a measurable goal. So increasing the amount of water I drink at meals, or replacing the number of sodas I have during the day with a number of waters. That's something I can measure. That's something I can directly observe. So if I want to increase the amount of water I drink at my meals, I may not even have to replace the soda. I could just do the water on top of the soda,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then that takes us to the achievable part. One of the biggest problems in people's goal setting is that they set a goal to be perfect. And no one goes from 0 to perfect overnight. That's just not possible.
Mm-hmm.
And then they find themselves being discouraged and feeling beaten down and feeling like they failed. And I think you can avoid that by using this SMART approach. So I'm going to continue on. So achievable goals. I'm basically a behaviorist, and so I say we start with a baseline. You have to, how much water am I currently drinking at meals? If I'm not drinking water at meals at all, then my current baseline is 0.
Yep.
I want to set my first initial goal as slightly above my baseline. If I'm currently drinking water with meals on the average, if I count the number of meals I have per week, 21 meals if you eat 3 meals a day, and I drink water with 3 of those meals per week, then I might say I would set my my first initial goal at maybe drinking water at 4 meals per week, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we start with a baseline. We have to know where we're starting so that we can see incremental improvement. If I say I'm going to only drink water at meals, during the week, but then on Thursday they have bread pudding in the cafeteria, and I love bread pudding with milk, and then I have milk, well, then I've failed, right? If you set incremental goals that are just slightly above your baseline and then work on increasing that week by week, or as you hit a period of success of meeting that goal, then you make progress. But I set a goal for no more than 80% ever, because no one is perfect. Not one single person in this world does something every single time. So I have to say, if you can get there 80% of the time, you're doing a pretty good job.
It's a lot better than 0, at least.
It's a whole lot better than 0. So SMART, specific, measurable, achievable. So set the goal low enough that you are virtually guaranteed of success when you first start. That will encourage you to continue on at, in the goal. Now, this is a really important part that's coming up. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant.
Yep.
If you
have
set
to
a goal,
want the goal.
you have to want it. And if you get to the end of your first week and you say, didn't make my goal, you have to evaluate, was it specific? Was it measurable? Was it achievable? And if it was all of those, then perhaps it wasn't relevant.
Maybe you want to keep smoking or drinking. Like,
That's
why should you
right.
stop?
That's
yeah,
right.
Why should you stop? And you have to really consider that before you make a goal.
That's right. Sometimes often I think we set goals because we feel we ought to do those things, not because we really want to. They're not really relevant to us as individuals.
They're imposed on us, so
Right.
to speak, or we feel like they are.
Or we feel,
Uh-huh.
that like they are.
Mhm.
We ought to lose weight. We ought to drink more water because it's healthier for us. But if it's not truly relevant to you, you're likely not going to succeed in that. If it's not relevant to you, I say set a different goal.
Yep.
Find something that is relevant.
Mhm.
So then it's not that you failed at the goal, it's that the goal setting process failed in that part. My
Mhm.
goal was not relevant.
Yep.
I need to look at what is really a relevant goal for me. What is something I really want to do? I want to improve on. And that can help you to find goals and set goals that are meaningful to you and that are likely to be achievable. So the last part, part of the SMART, is time bound. So if I do my baseline of how much water am I drinking in the course of a week with meals, and I find it's three meals per week I'm having water, then the time bound part is that I would increase my water consumption to 4 meals per week.
Yep.
Right. So then often we start off and we're gung ho. So I drink water with breakfast, lunch, and dinner the first day. I have water with breakfast the next day. Wahoo! I reached my goal, and then I have a soda for lunch that second day because I figured I've reached my goal. I'm going to celebrate a bit, and I have soda with dinner that night, and I'm celebrating. And then the next day I think, but I don't want to fall off the wagon here. I'm gonna drink water again. So we have water for breakfast and lunch the third day, and we find at the end of the first week we have far exceeded our original goal. And so we say, I'm doing great. I can set my next goal above my current achievement.
Mhm.
That's a mistake, because your current achievement was based on this initial kind of momentum that you had when you started toward this. So I would say if your goal was to increase your water consumption to 4 meals per week and you made it to 10 meals per week, that's fabulous. But for the next week, you shouldn't set your goal to make 11 meals. You should set your goal to make 6 meals. And then see how that goes. Now, if the next week you also exceed the 6-meal goal and you make it to 12, then I'd say the next week, the third week, you might set it for 9.
So try to be conservative and realistic. So to
Yes,
speak.
I would
What
much.
if you want to fall back? You take those things into consideration.
Absolutely, I think we have to allow for bad days
Mm-hmm.
or bad weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want you to fail at something that is relevant to you and that is achievable to you because you move too quickly in increasing the criterion for success.
Yeah.
So, and I would suggest you never set the criterion above 80% unless it's something like, I want to quit murdering people.
Yeah.
I want to instead respect
That's
life.
very, very discreet.
Yes,
right?
it's
You
very
can-
discreet.
Yeah.
That should always be, at 0%. We should never
Exactly.
murder people.
Yeah.
But for most human behaviors, there's not 100%. We are doing well if we can, I'm sure you are a very healthy guy, and I'm sure there are times when you have ice cream.
Yep.
Yeah.
Today, for example. Yep. Well, I really like the SMART model. That's very interesting, and it agrees with many ways I see it, but it's still difficult to incorporate it
Mhm.
and make it your own model.
Mm-hmm.
Here we could go different ways. I would actually want to bring in the psychoanalysts here a little bit,
Mhm,
just
sure.
to illustrate. So the conflict you're experiencing when you want to make yourself a goal, many people see that as a conflict between you and the outside world. So you see ideals and you want to be like them, that's often how people view it. You're being imposed, like it's being imposed, like I said earlier. But actually, in many ways, it's not that you don't want it. It's that so many parts of you don't want it. So you have sub-personalities. That's the psychoanalyst model, at least.
Mm-hmm.
You have a sub-personality that wants to go out and take a cigarette. One who needs to go and take a cup of coffee, the id.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the Freudian model, of course. But we have also different sub-personalities within the id, I would say. So one is the sexual drive, one is anger, one is hunger, so on and so forth. So here you have thousands of conflicts within yourself, and here is where you find the addictions, for example. So if I'm addicted to cigarettes, I can't just replace it in my view, as far as I understand it. You can't replace the addiction, but you can build a structure around it. So you can build a healthy structure around your addiction. There's going to be times when you still want to go out and take a cigarette, but if you have found or constructed something around it that is more powerful, so that I want to be a healthy person, for example, I think I can run longer if I don't smoke. I can read longer. I can concentrate better when I'm not constantly craving nicotine. So you build these structures around it. You don't necessarily kick it out, because I don't know if that's even possible.
Well, it is. It is possible to like kick out cigarettes entirely, but it's easier.
I don't mean kick out them. I don't mean to kick out cigarettes physically. You can do that.
Right.
I mean kick out the want, the
addiction.
desire for
I think
cigarettes.
you can replace them though. And this is the behaviorist in me again.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at the functional purpose of cigarettes, what purpose do they serve in a person's life? And as you know, someone who's a former smoker and a periodic current smoker,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I've gone through this whole thing myself. But looking at what function do cigarettes serve for me? One is because cigarettes are not socially acceptable and we don't smoke them indoors.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me, I sit on my porch and pet my dog. It gives me time to be with my dog
Mm-hmm.
that I wouldn't otherwise take.
Exactly. Yeah.
It gives me a reason to leave a gathering, a social gathering, so that I get a little bit of social space.
It's a little break.
A little
Yeah.
break. It allows me to take deep breaths, sort of like a calming sigh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've looked at all of these things, as well as other purposes. And are there other things I could do to meet those purposes, to meet those functions that are healthier for me?
Mm-hmm.
I could still get a break from social gatherings by, for example, going to the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
And just going into the bathroom and shutting the door, running a little water, and taking a few deep breaths.
Mm-hmm.
You know, collecting my thoughts. It's a way for me to kind of graciously get out of a conversation I'm done with,
Yes.
or just to get away from people.
Mm-hmm.
Social gatherings can be, pretty intense.
Absolutely.
Are there things I could do that would get me outside to pet my dog? Yes, there are.
Millions of things, probably.
Millions of things.
Yeah.
But I think, I tend to go out and sit on my chair on the porch and pet the dog. She's learned that that's where I am. And she comes in. I could take a cup of tea out. So there are other things I could replace
Mm-hmm.
cigarettes with
Okay.
that would help to serve the same function as cigarettes. That,
Mm-hmm.
But then it gets down to the, do you want to? Is it relevant?
Yes.
And you can use all of that together.
I accept the functionalist approach,
Mhm.
but my view, though, is that many of the things we do, they're not rational or reasonable. We do them irrationally. We have an interest that the id, for example, is not conscious, generally speaking.
Mhm.
So it's not that you couldn't get the small rationalizations out. For example, that you would leave a social gathering. You could replace that with something else. It's the physical, emotional craving. I don't think you can ever completely get rid of. You can build a structure so heavily around it and engulf it in something else, so that you rarely think about it. But at a certain point, you might walk in the streets,
Smell a cigarette.
smell a cigarette, and you're like,
I could have one
"Hot
of those right
damn!
now."
I
Mhm.
would really want a cigarette right now." Or a stressful day. You're gonna be like, "Yeah, I can go downstairs and have a soda instead or a cup of coffee," but irrationally,
Mm-hmm.
I still want a cigarette at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is true. And I think it's true for other addictions as well. Alcohol, like some things, they have their own niche. So that you really like, you can find different ways of replacing them, or at least like doing different things that are similar to them. But I think some things are so peculiar that they still have a grasp on you, even though you have abandoned them a long time ago. And I think that's true for relationships with people. Yeah, you can cut some people off completely, but they'll still show up in your thoughts every now and then, and they'll tell you inside of your head, why'd you run away from me, or why'd you leave me, or why why are we not together right now, or something like that. I think those personalities, they still live, but they don't have those seats of function which you described in a very, very illustrative manner anymore. If you catch my drift on that.
Oh, I definitely catch your drift. I think we differ in our approaches to things.
Mm-hmm.
You are definitely more psychodynamic. I am definitely more empirical. I tend to be a cognitive behaviorist, leaning heavily on the behaviorist.
Yeah. Well, I will agree with you though. The functionalist approach works very well. It's just sometimes you can't eliminate things completely, but you can still work with them enough so that it's good enough. So in my view, it's still the best way to do it. It's just I don't believe that you can completely eliminate them.
Well, and in that case, I think we do have to look at what works for us as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are coming from a psychodynamic approach, a meaning-based approach, I think then using meaning-based approaches to changing is totally appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
If I am more an empiricist, then it makes more sense, and I will sort of buy into a more empirical approach. So, or a functional approach, so I think it depends on the person. And when I was working as a counselor, I didn't impose my empirical approach on everyone. I kind of let them come in, and I looked at what kind of a person is this, what motivates them, how do they process things, and then I went with that because that's who they are, and they deserve that respect.
That is essential in therapy, right? Yeah. Like it's not your job to correct their lives.
No.
That is completely connected with the relevancy that you described in your goal. You want your patients or
clients,
even
or friends, even family.
I was just going to say, even your friends or people you love, you want them to live their life. It doesn't mean that you don't want them to live a better life, but you want them to find their path themselves with your guidance if they want it.
Right. So
you would have to look at, if someone's very open to experience, you might not use this behaviorist approach. You might instead, if you know the method, use the Jungian approach, for example, which would entail helping them see that they can create this vision for their lives, a dream-like existence where they can follow a pattern of behavior that's not necessarily constructed by themselves in a schedule, but that's, for example, the hero archetype. You would live out the hero archetype in your life, and from that you would be courageous. From that you would do things that you have to do to get to your goals eventually.
I would probably still go back to the cognitive behavioral approach and say, what does that hero archetype look like?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the same thing you do there, because you find little parts as a behaviorist, and you say the hero. Let's say you're talking to me and I'm your patient. You would tell me, for example, that the hero, he gets up every morning early and eats a good breakfast.
Actually, I wouldn't even tell you that. I would say, Marius, what does the hero look like? Mm-hmm. What does he do? Mm-hmm. What's your idea of a hero? And I would have you define the hero archetype.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I would have you pick out what part of that do you think you want to work on.
Mm-hmm. So you would make me see it anyways.
Yes.
So
I would make it be about your vision of what it is.
Sure, and you would probably add some things that are very vital. For example, that it helps to eat a breakfast. It really does help.
Oh, it does.
So small things like that, a behaviorist like
yourself would add. A behaviorist is a little more directive than...
Yeah. A bit more, you find little manipulations that will make your life better.
Well, and we tend to work on, okay, what do you want to accomplish? And here's what I know about this. I'll give you my knowledge about how behavior works and help you devise a plan that I think is likely to be successful.
Precisely.
So.
And I'm not sure we could go into the clinical approach right away, but I think we should make a stop with time first.
Okay.
We should talk a little bit about time management.
Okay.
If you want, we can go from that to the clinical
All right.
ideas we have, because that would be interesting. Well, we'll ask first, then, how should we view time in our lives? What is time? We don't have to go down to the metaphysics of it. That's not
Thank
necessary.
goodness.
Yeah, that would be a rabbit hole right here. But
And you would be beyond my depth.
perhaps, how should we view time, you think, in life, as a person, just a person?
I believe we should view time as a resource that is limited,
Hmm.
like all resources are, and a resource that we use wisely. We use in ways that benefit us best.
Hmm. Yeah. And for most people throughout time, they haven't had as much time,
Hmm.
without the pun intended, as we do today. Most people have had a short life. 99.9999% of people have had probably a life of around 30 or less years. But today we have this tremendous opportunity, which I don't think we're ever grateful enough for,
That is correct.
that we can live till we're 80. That's the general age, 80, 79, something like that. And we in your view should view it as a resource, and I agree with you. It is. It's a tremendous opportunity that we're just so lucky to have.
But if we don't view it as a resource, I think we end up wasting it. We fritter it away. It's like if you don't view your money as a limited resource and you just spend until it's gone, then you end up spending all your money before you run out of need
Hmm.
and before the next batch of money comes in.
Exactly.
So, and that we can do the same with time. We can spend our time, we can fritter it away, and then we don't have enough time to get that paper written.
Yeah, exactly. You're sitting in the night before, right?
Right. Got 4 hours to write a 20-page paper.
Yeah.
There's just not enough time.
For most people, it isn't. That's true. Yeah, that's very difficult, right? So it is a resource, especially for Westerners. That's a very typical way for Westerners to see it. You hear it all the time. I don't have time. I'm so busy. And it actually it's a very popular thing to say. Most people you will talk to will tell you, oh, everything's just going so fast by. Time's just floating away. Right? We're losing time all the time, like you lose money. That is a metaphor we use in the West without even noticing it all the time. But I read this little book called Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince.
Little Prince.
I don't remember exactly how you say it in French. I haven't had French in a couple of years. Beautiful little book. The most sold book, second most sold book after Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens in the world. It's very popular. In there, I remember, I think the fox, I don't know if you've read it.
I read it probably 45 years ago. So
Regardless,
Yeah.
one of the actors in the little story said that something under the lens of the things that you love are the things that you waste your time on, or something like that. So if you're willing to step outside, I haven't prepared for this. I just came up with this right now.
That's good.
If you give up the time of the view of seeing time as a resource for just a moment, you can lose yourself in the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And enjoy it with someone you love, and you don't think about time because it becomes sort of an aha experience, like Maslow calls it, or some sort of transcendent experience. You're sitting there just letting time not be part of your situation. So I think that is also important to allow for. But most of the time, we don't see it that way. We have to structure our days. If you want to go to work and come to work at the right time and
Right.
eat your
We don't have the
breakfast before.
leisure
Yeah.
of allowing ourselves. Although we can, but we still have those constraints. Which that's one of the reasons I started using the Outlook calendar on my computer, was because I would find sometimes that I would get started thinking about something or writing something, and would look up and, oh my gosh, I'm 5 minutes late to class. Or I would be sitting at my desk and a student would come in and say, Dr. Gold, we haven't class today?" I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, yes, we are having class. I'm so sorry." But I got involved. I got deeply involved
Yeah.
in my work, and that is such a beautiful feeling to be
It
deeply
is.
involved.
It's great.
But again, because of the constraints of the modern world, we often don't have the leisure to allow ourselves to just become totally involved in things and to forget about time,
Mhm.
to just immerse ourselves in what makes us happy.
Yeah.
And so, honestly, yes, I try to schedule time when I can just allow myself
Yeah.
to become immersed.
Mhm.
So my summers are, I will schedule whole weeks where I have no obligations so that I can find what I want to immerse myself in and then immerse myself in it.
I wish I could do that too, and I probably will end up doing that
There
this
will be a
summer.
time in your life.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure I'll realize at a certain point that I'm going almost too fast, and I'll have to stop by and kind of live in the moment, I suppose, because that is what we forget sometimes. We always we always want to live better, but we forget that it is only in the moment that you can be and exist.
Mhm.
Uh, and
And we spend
yeah,
so much of our moments worrying about the past or planning for the future that we
we
skip
forget.
over the enjoying the actual moment.
Absolutely, and so I just want to kick in a little bit just to I suppose have an alternate view here that we should view time as a resource because it is very limited, and as I mentioned, it has been more limited than it is now.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean we have to keep that time, but we also have to remember to live in the moment. And I think one of those moments, for example, when you really want to live in the moment, is when you have a family. And a lot of people today they focus on a career, right? They want to have a career. They think they will have one. Most people don't have a career. Most people have a job,
Right.
but careers entail that you stay in the same place for a while. And most people have, I think, I think they switch a job every 2 years or something. I think
I
that's
think you can have a career even when you switch jobs frequently if you're
if
working,
it's in the same field, right?
if it's in the same field,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
or a similar field.
I
But people
suppose.
people evolve.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, sure. And I'm not saying people should confine themselves to a long career in the same place, and that's not my point. Is though that we're focusing a lot on we're emphasizing careers more than family. For example,
Right.
I think especially today after, I mean, women haven't been in the workplace for that long yet,
That's right.
like 50 years after the war,
Right.
regardless after the war. And I think women have a tremendous pressure on them because they can't get kids after they're 40
40.
something, right?
Not
Men
40.
can, men
Right.
can,
Yeah.
women can't. So women have this time limit that's even worse than it is for men, and they,
The ticking biological clock.
yep, the one that you can never socially construct, so to speak. Um, so I think a lot of women they feel like they should get a career, but they they don't get that vibe that they should go and get their family, from the society, but from themselves. I think they do. I think they feel like they should have a family. I think a lot of men do as well, but I think for women, family is more important. I think people are more important in general for women, not for everyone, but on average. So I think which one's the best? I mean, what do you think?
A balance is perfect.
I agree with you. I mean, careers are amazing, but
Right.
family, I mean,
When I was finishing my doctorate, and I was probably in my mid 30s, I think. I'd already had one successful career, and burned out essentially. And I'd been teaching as an adjunct professor, sort of as a side gig during my whole other school psychology career, and I really enjoyed it. And as I was burning out as a school psychologist, I thought, this whole college teaching thing is pretty much a gas. I love this. So maybe I'll just go back to school and work toward being a college professor. And at the time, I was a young person, and young people are, there's this kind of developmental pressure, this evolutionary pressure to procreate, and also just to have companionship,
mhm.
to find someone to share your life with.
Yeah,
And I dated and all of that, but
but it's just
but I
not the
hadn't
same as
found
something
well, I hadn't
concept,
found
right?
anybody that I was really happy with. And I thought, that's okay. I can make a life on my own. And I wasn't ready to settle for for anybody. I really wanted to be happy.
Mm.
So anyway, I came to Missouri and I was working on my dissertation, and I met someone, and there came the fork in the road, and I thought, okay, so I finished my dissertation. Now I have to make a choice about, because he's a farmer.
Mm.
He's a very bright, educated farmer, and he's intellectually stimulating, and I love him deeply. But you don't pick up a farm and move it.
Yeah.
And you don't just sell a farm and buy a new farm someplace else. And so when I was looking at academic careers, I had observed the women in academia in the the research one institutions, and I thought, I don't think I want their life.
Yeah.
Because pretty much they just work.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a family life, they have a husband who manages the family life. But if both of them are academics, they are just really stressed out, and I don't want that life. So I started looking at, what do I want from my life? And it was easy for me to choose, basically, to make a life with him and then make a career around that life, because I'd already had a successful career.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like I had lived out that part of me that needed to do that. And I thought, I can, I'll figure out a way to make a career here. But I don't think I would ever want to not have had a career at all.
Yeah. That's how I feel too. I mean, I want you to, if you have more to say, I want you to continue. I just want to kick in real quick with this. Like, I really want a career as well. Like, I want to be something like a professor or something professionally, and get a high degree and everything, and study a lot, because I love studying and I love learning. But I also want a family. Like that.
Right.
If I look at my future and I imagine it without a family, it has no color for me.
Sad.
Yeah, and I get how some people, they don't need that vision in their lives, but I think most people do.
Most people would like to have companionship.
Yeah, I mean, we are social animals.
We
are. There's no doubt about it. So, yeah, and so you decided that's the most that was, at least in that period.
At that point.
Yeah,
right.
at that point.
And that I could place primary importance on my personal, my romantic relationship, because that was an area of my life that I had felt that I needed to develop in stronger ways. And when I found someone who was a good match for me, I thought, this is the time to do it then.
Mm-hmm. It's a call from heaven, so to speak. I mean,
it's an opportunity, and you don't pass up those opportunities.
Yeah.
So it's just like if you get a career opportunity, if you've got a strong family life and you suddenly have a career opportunity that's a wonderful opportunity, you take that opportunity.
Extra money,
if you can,
right? Everything.
More meaning in your
especially
meaning in your
right.
life. Yeah.
Your goals that you've been wanting all throughout your life, they're just coming together in this one little. As you said, you're meeting at the fork in the road, and you're thinking, well, should I allow myself this, or should I think about everything else?
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult.
It has to be a balancing act.
Yeah, it has to be. It always has to be. Yeah. So, I suppose I was going to ask you, should we follow one's bliss? But I think we've established that bliss is very difficult to follow.
Well, bliss is very difficult to define.
First of all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to aim at, because if you can't define it, how can you aim at it? And that's the thing, like, if without an aim, we can't have a goal, right? We have to be able to aim in a direction. So it was more like a trick question, or I suppose they call it a rhetorical question. We can't really aim at bliss. And Viktor Frankl said that happiness we can't follow happiness in itself. We can only have it ensue a meaningful life. Happiness can come on top of meaning. So that's my little part on Frankl. So I think we already discussed a little bit the personality types, and we don't have to look at that in view of time in this conversation. We can do that in the future if you want. I want to take us to the clinical sphere. We don't have that much time left, so we'll look at the clinical part a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a therapist?
Okay, well, I started my career as a school psychologist. And so as a school psychologist, well, you can have lots of different roles as a school psychologist. But my first professional job, I did testing, evaluation of students with learning difficulties and making plans for those students, probably about 70% of the time, and the other 30% of my time was spent in consulting with classroom teachers and seeing kids in individual and group therapy. And so I did that for a number of years. I then left New York, went to Oregon. I was doing a whole lot less counseling, lots more testing, and the counseling that I was doing there, I was in many more schools. 9 schools a week was, and so it's really difficult to do much meaningful counseling in about 40 minutes.
Yeah.
When you're in 9 schools a week. And the kids that I would get were often the kids who'd already blown through all of the other school services.
So the more difficult types.
Right. And so it was difficult, and we're not going to fix in 40 minutes a week the kinds of
it's more serious
issues.
than that, right?
Yes. Many of them needed residential care, actually. And they certainly needed something more intensive than once a week for 40 minutes with a school counselor, because there's also a limitation to what you can really cover in school, because that child comes in for 40 minutes, but then they have to leave and be able to function in a school environment. And it's difficult to do that. It's difficult to concentrate on doing math after you've talked about the abuse you've suffered. So we don't do that in schools. When that comes up and that's a serious issue, we work for outside counseling so that the child has some time to prepare for those sessions and then time to process them after it's over without the pressure of having to go back into a social setting. But so I did some individual and group counseling as a school psychologist in both New York and in Oregon, a little bit in Oregon. And then I've also worked as a school counselor and as a behavior therapist. So as a behavior therapist, you're not doing so much counseling as you are helping people to solve the problems in their life.
Yeah.
And that's right up my alley.
Perfect. Well, I as you were talking about the school psychology you were immersed in, I was thinking I can imagine that when children come into therapy, you get more of those more members of that group that have been kind of asked to go into therapy and who haven't sought it themselves. I can imagine it must be like that in many cases.
It depends on the age group that you're working with, but I would say it's probably about half and half.
Half and half. Okay.
Yeah. If you've got if you're in a situation where you've got a reasonable ratio of therapists to students. So like in New York, it was 1 to 1,000, and I would say it was half and half. Half of the students came to me because they wanted to see the counselor, and the other half were sent by the principal or the teacher or parents or someone else.
Yeah, my point is then, because I think in a more normal setting, I suppose, out in the real world, it's real, of course, but I think a lot more people come of their own accord. Maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe a few more come of their own accord, but they'll often come because their spouse has said...
Yeah, someone's asked them to.
Yes.
Okay,
we need to do that. A boss, the courts.
Of course, that's a big one. But my point is that a lot of people, they go to therapy without wanting to deeply, and I think that's connected right away with the SMART model that you mentioned earlier. If it's not relevant to you, why should you make a goal? How should you change your life if you don't want to change? And Carl Rogers, he said that there's 2 things you have to do before therapy. 1, admit that you have a problem they have to solve. Everyone can probably think of something, but not everyone wants to go and have someone else look at them and help them solve it. 2nd, you would want some sort of change in your life. And another psychiatrist, Theodore Dalrymple, his real name is Anthony Daniels. This is just a pseudonym for writing. He writes a lot about his experiences with the underclass in therapy and such. So he needed some sort of immunity, some sort of immunity from people checking out his work who went to his therapy sessions. Anyways, he says that the first real thing the therapist has to say is that to his patients is that your life is not my responsibility. Like, of course, I have a responsibility for our sessions, but your life is your life, and you are the responsible actor here. So I really can't change you if you don't want to. And I think that's a big topic. I would imagine.
Well, yes. And people who don't want to be in counseling, who have been made to go to counseling, my approach with them has always been, okay, you don't want to come here. How do we convince the people who are making you come here that you don't need this?
Yep. So different goal.
So different goal.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't want to be here, let's talk about how do we make this stop. I don't want you to have to do this either if you don't want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But we can work together to figure out what you need to do to convince them you don't need this. I'm not asking you to change anything fundamental about yourself, but we just have to convince them that you don't need this.
Yep. I think if you do something you don't want to do, whether it is a goal you establish for yourself, a small change, short term or long term, as in therapy, I think if you repress those feelings you have that want you to do something else, they're going to come bite you right back. They're going to take revenge on you for pressing them down, for trying to build a structure around them, so to speak. So I
used
think
to tell kids that it's like trying to hold a ball underwater in the swimming pool. The minute you're not paying attention to it, it pops right up to the surface
exactly,
again.
that's a very good metaphor for it. So I think I was going to ask you, how do you think we view life? But I suppose that would be a very open question.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How many days do we have?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to just tell you what I meant by it. So I
Okay.
think most people see their lives not using this term, but as a gestalt, as a holistic.
Mhm.
They see it as, they experience it, right? It's not that you don't necessarily go around thinking about the different parts all the time. Of course, you think about the parts, but you don't really cut your life up that much unless you're consciously doing it. So I think in therapy, you break it up, right? You break the gestalt up into the background parts that
Mhm.
construct you, so to speak.
I think it depends on the approach you take and the client you're working with, but I think you go back and forth. You bounce back and forth between the whole and the parts and the whole and the parts. I mean, you look at the whole and you say, is this a pleasing whole? And if it's not a pleasing whole, well, what parts of it are not pleasing?
Mm-hmm.
And then we work on the part, and then we bounce back to the whole and say, has this made the whole more pleasing?
So the whole would be the product. Say if it's an equation, the whole would be
Mhm.
whatever the components equal.
Mhm.
But you look at the parts to change the whole, of course, which is as a behaviorist, you would definitely split things up into parts. Um, I think a different approach for people who are more open. I already mentioned Jungian therapy might work better for people with a high degree of openness. Not because they're not you're not. No, it's not because you're not using the same method. Because I actually think you are. Like I mentioned, you're just you're building the part of the hero archetype. You're just splitting it up. But I think open people can see the connections and the patterns more easily than people are more conscientious who just want to have the discrete things they can do and just one after the other.
Tick them off the list.
Exactly, check them off. So I think what you do as a Jungian therapist, and I'm no therapist, I wouldn't really know, but I've heard from Dr. Jordan Peterson, for example, who has a lot of patients who are very open, that the Jungian approach works very well with open people.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they use dreams and such in this therapy as well, because open people have a lot of archetypal dreams with ancient themes, where they live out patterns in the hero archetype in their dreams, actually. And it's pretty crazy how
Well, I
that
think
goes.
most people's dreams could be interpreted that way.
I think a lot of people have those dreams, but I think that people who are open have more of those, and I think that goes together with the fact that artists, musicians, writers, they're usually more open, which is why they're so good at making stories. Movie makers, they're great storytellers because they know the fundamental parts of a story, but it's not that they necessarily split them up. They just know how to create it, and of course they have to build it up from the bottom up. So I think a good way to build a story in your life is using fiction, so to speak, because fiction actually talks about this relationship you have between the archetypes and the world. So I think as a I suppose an actor in a story, you view the world as holistic, but you also know that there is one fundamental part or character in the story that's order, one that's chaos. So order would be where everything that you want is as it should be. It's the known, while chaos is the unknown, where you really don't know what's going on. But you have to balance in between those
Mm-hmm.
in order to live correctly. So the third character would be you. you mediate between the two grand characters of the story. And I think this is essentially the same as the behaviorist would do. It's just you make the parts. So balancing would be living in the zone of proximal development, I would say.
The zone of proximal development I see as being that zone that is just outside our current level of functioning.
Yep.
So what's in behavioral terms, it would be setting that achievable goal. So something just outside our current functioning, not something way outside our current functioning, but just outside our current functioning. And I do think I want to go back for a minute about the theories,
Mm-hmm.
because all of the theories are basically describing human experience.
Mm-hmm.
They just interpret it in different ways. So behaviorists interpret human experience differently than psychoanalysts, different than Jungian, different than humanistic, different. But we're all talking about the same thing. We just use different words.
Exactly.
So the theories, I think, are important, and some theories are better at explaining and predicting behavior than other theories are.
Of course.
Some are attractive, kind of on an emotional level, almost, even though they're not scientifically sound. And I think, as scientists, well, it depends on whether you think of psychology as a science or not. But I think as scientists, we recognize all these theories, but then we base our practice on what the research supports.
Exactly.
And whatever name we want to call it, whatever. But the important thing is evidence-based practices.
Sure. Yeah.
So as long as you're using evidence-based practice, I don't care.
No. Yeah.
What you call it.
Exactly, and some people use more unorthodox methods because they find that they work for themselves, and that is how you get new ideas into science.
That's right.
Well,
established science isn't always, the best science.
It's very rigid and strict,
yes.
right? Yeah, I mean that before Freud, there was some mention of the unconscious, but very little.
He was revolutionary.
Yeah,
right.
and Peterson, he actually argues that Freudian psychology is a subsection of a larger psychology, which is the Jungian psychology. So that's how he views it. He thinks Jung went a lot deeper.
And I would say psychology itself is a subset of philosophy.
Oh, yeah. And you've probably heard of the fact that all sciences come from mathematics, then physics, mathematics, chemistry, right? It goes in the circle. And then from chemistry, you have biology. From biology, study of life, you find humans, sociology, psychology, philosophy, everything like that. So everything's connected in that sense. Absolutely. I think we could probably end on the note with zone of proximal development, because I want to develop this idea a little bit more. It is standing on the edge between chaos and order, in my view.
Okay.
You have one foot in both camps. So I think that is what the hero has to do in order to be a hero. You can't just be in the known area because it's too safe. It's too rigid, so to speak, like the sciences without a revolution. But you can also not just be engulfed in chaos, because you can't live in chaos.
Right.
Likewise, you can't live really when you don't have any structure of your time.
Right.
But you also really cannot live seriously as a person, as a human, where you have everything set up 100%, every second described as you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this.
You can survive in order, but it's hard to live a completely
meaningful
ordered life.
Right?
It's hard to really live.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean, even when you work, you don't just live in order, because you work with chaos. You interact with chaos and create things out of chaos, right? In a conversation, if everything I knew matched everything you knew, there really wouldn't be any sense having a discussion, because
correct,
we really not going to get anywhere with it. But
we
since
wouldn't be very interested in each other either.
Exactly, if we were all alike, I mean, what would there be to discuss? So I think we're always on that edge. It's just some people balance it better than others, and I think people who go to therapy, they have a mismatch in their balance. They can't balance it correctly. They're either too ordered like anorexic people, that they see their body as so orderly they don't even accept their own bodies, and it's of course an aberration, an abnormal case, but also if you have too many traumas, you're too much in chaos because you don't know where you are. You don't really understand what happened to you, and without understanding it, or at least being able to cope with it, you're in chaos, right?
Well, I think if I were seeing you in therapy, I would definitely use that because that's how you see it.
Mm-hmm.
If I were working with someone else, or if I was looking at my own life, I would look at it not so much as a balance between order and chaos as I would a balance between safety and excitement.
Okay.
So,
Which I view as the exact same.
yes,
But
exactly.
the words describe a different reality.
Exactly, and the words are important because of the meaning they have to us individually. And so, but I think for other people, they would describe it differently. And so we have to look at where they're coming from.
Yeah, and if I were a therapist, I couldn't just necessarily impose my terminology on a patient because that wouldn't be useful.
Right. For them, it wouldn't. They'd be looking at you like you've grown a third head.
Exactly. I suppose we have to cut this conversation out. Before we do it, I want to take 1 minute to just actually map this theory of chaos and order onto the human biology.
Okay.
I read this book called The Master and His Emissary. This would be a great topic to discuss with you in the future. It's a pretty long book, about 500 really dense pages, where he discusses the relationship between the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Yeah, I heard of this book, but I have not read it.
Okay, it's amazing. It's very interesting, and he goes throughout time and he looks at how the different parts of the brain, the right and left hemispheres, have different worldviews, where the right deals with the unknown,
Chaos.
mostly. Of course, they have the same functions overall, very complex, but they have different worldviews from his findings. And the left deals with the known. So I think that actually shows that we live as though we are in a domain of chaos and order, or safety and excitement, which would be your terms. Dr. Gold.
Or sequence and space.
Yeah, exactly. We could probably find 100 terms.
Right.
Well, it's been lovely again to have a conversation. I think we should have another one. This was kind of short, but that's all we have this time. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.